In this session, we will create a simple yet effective web page layout. So far, we have learned how to create different piece parts of a web page. For instance, we have learned how to create a list, how to create a table, how to create hyperlinks, how to create new paragraphs, how to format a text, and so on. Now, we will see how these different piece parts come together to make a functional and complete web page. So, for this we will create a layout of a web page. Layout is also called wireframing a web page. Typically, a web page will look something like this. This is how the websites that we saw before, this is how they are structured, mostly web pages. On the top there is a section, there is a area called header, and this header we will have a company logo or a company's name, some images maybe, and maybe some important announcements. There is this area on the left side, sidebar, where you will have typically some navigation for the web page. So, that is, there will be some menu items there. So, when you click on a certain menu item, you will go to a page relevant to that particular information. In the center, we will have, this is the main area, content. That is where the main message of the web page is. This is what you want the reader to really zero in on to read. So, this is where your main article or some event which is happening or some product that you are defining will go here, depending on what the page is trying to convey. And then finally, at the bottom we have a footer, and at the footer we will have again some links which will tell, let us say, how to contact the company, how to find out more information, what your privacy or security policies are, and so on. And typically on a web page, the header and the footer will stay the same from page to page, whereas the sidebar and the content will change. And so, different pages will have a different sidebar with different menu items or different content, because the page itself has a different type of information in it. So, let us see how this actual layout is put together. So, we will go through HTML which creates this layout, and for this we need to understand some concepts. And one of the concepts we need to understand is the concept of a div. So, what is a div? Div is a HTML element, and it defines a section or a block of a web page. Like in this layout we had 4 different sections. So, therefore, we will need 4 divs. So, those divs will name them as header, sidebar, we will put them in there, header, sidebar, to say what this div is about, but that is where you actually put the content of the div, where we are saying header and we are saying that it is a sidebar. That is where you will put the content in. So, let us see a HTML code which defines a div. So, here is a HTML code which defines a div, in fact 4 divs. The first div says that we have a header. So, we start a div, and in between the div there is some content, we are calling that content header, and then we have a second div, and in that one we are calling it a sidebar one, and then we have a div with content in it, and then we have a div with a footer in it. So, there are 4 divs. So, these are the 4 panels we want. Let us say that we create this HTML, we save it, we save the file, and then we show it in the browser. This is what it will look like. Very interesting. This is not quite what we had in mind. Rather than just showing simple words, simple content of the div, namely header, sidebar 1, content and footer, we needed 4 areas. Those 4 areas will contain the information for each div. So, in order to create these 4 areas, we need to introduce some style to these divs. We need to put some style into these divs using CSS. Style will have properties like what the width of a div is, what the height of a div is, what the border is, and so on. So, let us now change our HTML code to put style to these divs. So, here we have defined in the first div we have defined a border which is 1 pixel wide and it is solid black in color. We have defined a height and we have defined a width. The same thing we have done to all the 4 divs. We have defined a border, so it is visible, it is an area, it is visible, each area has a border, it has a height and it has a width. And in this, for simplicity, we have defined to be 1/4 of the height for each of these divs, and width is taking the complete screen width 100%. So, if we save this one, this modified file and run this is what it will look like. Okay, at least we have now 4 different areas where we can put our content of different type in each of these panels. Header is clearly at the right place and so is the footer, but this body with the sidebar and the content are one below the other. We actually want them to be side by side. So, we want the sidebar to take maybe part of the screen width and content to take the rest of the screen width. So, they are side by side. So, let us say that we are putting the width of the sidebar to be 20% and content width to be 80%. And let us look at that code with that change. So, here is the code where we have said the sidebar is 20% and the content is 80%, but not quite 80%, 79%. This is to take into account these different borders and margins that we have created. Without that, it won't come out to be right. So, we have created 79% and the footer and the header we have left alone. So, let us say with this change, let us save this and see what happens. All right, we have definitely sidebar to be taking 20% of width and content to be taking also part of the width, not quite 100%, maybe 80%, but in place of starting where the sidebar left off, the content panel is starting also from the left side. So, and it is below. So, what we want to say is that after sidebar takes up the 20%, then the content should start and should flush to the left to that. So, this is done by using this property of CSS style sheet called float. Float property either can be used to float an element to the left, or float equal to left float to the left and float equal to right floats to the right of the screen. So, let us use this property in our divs to style the divs sidebar and content. So, here we have created this float equal to left in both of these, and just to make sure that this property does not carry on to our footer, we have cleared this property by this HTML tag called property called clear :left. So, this clears the property float. So, let us save this file and run this file and open this file, and sure enough we have now a pretty decent looking web page layout. We have a header at the top, in the center we have the sidebar one and the content, and on the lower one we have footer. It is quite there, roughly there, but we still need to make sure that the header does not take up 25% of the screen and footer does not take up 25%, and each of these areas are much smaller, and the menu items where the sidebar is and the content where the main message is take up most of the area of the screen. So, let us say that we are saying the header takes up only 20% of the height and the footer takes up 20% of the height, and the rest is 60% is taken up in the center panel, which is divided into sidebar and into content. So, let us make that change now. So, here we will put in the header to be height to be 20% and the sidebar height to be 60%, and of course, the content height also be 60%. So, they are side by side within the same central panel, and we have the footer to be 20%. So that's the only change we have made. The rest we have kept the same. And now let's save this new file and run, and sure enough we are very, very close to what we want to be. Namely, we have the header at the top and the sidebar, and the content takes majority of the screen area, and the footer is at the bottom. Now we can put in these areas what information we want for this particular page. So this is how a simple web page layout is created. In the handout, we have done this in a little more elegant way, where we have defined the concept of ID, we have defined the concept of a class, and these particular concepts are used to apply the CSS rules to a very specific HTML element, so that you can manage them better, and so you can control them better to position as well as to style. So please review your handout, which has lot more details in it, and finally practice creating some more layouts to your own liking.